Let's look at multiplication rules for integers and division rules. They happen to be the same. So the first rule is if you have one positive and one negative, then your answer is going to be negative. If you have two positives or two negatives, your answer is going to be positive. For instance, if you have a positive 7 times a negative 5, well, 7 times 5 is 35. When one of them's negative, the answer is negative. But with this one, negative 6 times negative 11. Well, 6 times 11 is 66. But when you have two negatives and you multiply or divide, your answer is positive. So just remember, if one of them is negative and not the other, the answer is negative. If they're both positive or both negative, the answer is positive. And anytime you multiply by 0, you get 0. Another helpful tip, when you have an odd number of negatives, like 3 negatives, 5 negatives, 7 negatives, then your answer is going to stay negative, okay? But when you have an even number of negatives and you're multiplying, your answer will end up being positive, okay? So if you have 2 negatives, it's going to end up being positive, or 4 negatives, or 6 negatives, you're going to end up with a positive answer. We can also use this to evaluate exponential notation. So let's look at this. This means negative 6 times negative 6. That's what that little squared means. Do it 2 times. Negative 6 times negative 6 is a positive 36. This is a little different, you guys. This one's tricky. That negative is in the front. It's not in parentheses. So you're doing this. You're doing a negative, and then you're doing 6 times 6. Okay, 6 times 6 is 36, and that negative would stay in the front. It's the same thing as multiplying, one of them being negative times a positive. But I always like to tell my students, the negative stays in the front. You're not doing negative 6 times negative 6. You're doing 6 times 6 and leaving the negative in the front. Negative 5 to the third would be negative 5 times negative 5 times negative 5. That's negative 125. Negative 2 to the fourth. Negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 2. That equals a positive 16. Remember, when you have an odd number of negatives, it stays negative. An even number of negative turns positive. These are the same rules for division. Positive 80 divided by negative 4 would be a negative 20. Negative 15 divided by positive 5 would be a negative 3. Positive 27 divided by positive 9 would give you a positive 3. Negative 45 divided by negative 3 would give you a positive 15. Remember, when the signs, if they're both positive or both negative, you're going to get a positive answer. Now, anytime 0 is divided by a number, like this one, if the 0 is on top, the answer is 0. Okay? When the 0 is on top. But when the 0 is on bottom of a fraction, it is undefined. Okay, you cannot divide by 0.